My purpose in this presentation is to show the insufficiency of the usual trilemma between exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism, and also to explain how what I have elsewhere called non-reductive pluralism undermines the trilemma. I'm not going to defend a specific theology of religions here, but only to show how we can avoid the trilemma, although I give hints what my own view is along the way. This trilemma stems from John Hick, who proposed a pluralist hypothesis as a Christian response to religious diversity, based on the religious ambiguity of the universe and the idea of eschatological verification. So Hick's idea was that the universe is religiously ambiguous in two ways. First, that we don't have decisive rational proof to show whether God exists or not, whether any religion is true or not. And second, among the religions, there's no decisive proof which one is correct. But, Hick says, at the end of the world, if there is if one of the religions is true, this will become apparent to people at the end of the world, and so this is a meaningful issue. Persons living within other traditions, then, he says, are equally justified in trusting their own distinctively religious experience and in forming beliefs on the basis of it. Now, the first problem that I have with Hick is that he's willing to take this pluralist position with respect to other religions, but not with respect to non-religious points of view, even though they're symmetrical. Hick's responds to the reconciliation of pluralism with factual differences among religions that may receive eschatological justification. That means at the end of the world we should find out whether we're reincarnated or whether we're going to hell or wherever we're going to go. And although he takes this response with respect to sorting out these religious views, he says that, well, no, because they're all equally liberating, or they're equally good responses to some ineffable reality, ultimate reality. If we're going to justify different positions because of their epistemic parity, that is, if equality of justification is a condition for recognition in the plurality of valid religions, then I think Hick really should say that the religious ambiguity of the world should imply that some naturalistic views would also fulfill this condition, such as those advocated in the global secular humanist movement. If eschatological verification shows that truth is not distributed equally between religious and non-religious views, it should also be taken to show that truth is not distributed equally among different religious traditions. As if at the end of the world we're going to find out if somebody was right and the other ones were wrong, then we shouldn't have this pluralist view about religions. If eschatological verification of one view as superior to others is consistent with taking the contradictory truths to be equally good reflections of some ultimate, as long as they're equally justified, then Hick's position on the religious ambiguity of the world implies that non-religious views should also not be excluded from the pluralist hypothesis. The theology of religions that you find in the Quran is, I think, very interesting in this regard, because there's several different kinds of differences that are discussed in the Quran among Muslims, Christians, between Muslims and pagans, and Christians and pagans, and all different kind of combinations. And this is just a typical example, but there's many verses of the Quran that we could use. It says, and they say no one will enter paradise except the one who is a Jew or a Christian. Those are their false hopes. Say, produce your evidence should you be truthful. Certainly whoever submits his will to Allah and is virtuous, and he shall have his reward from the Lord, and they will have no fear, nor shall they grieve. The Jews say the Christians stand on nothing, and the Christians say the Jews stand on nothing, though they follow the same book. So said those who had no knowledge, similar to what they say. Allah will judge between them on the day of resurrection concerning about that which they used to differ. This is interesting to me because there's an eschatological verification. We'll wait until the last day, but until the last day, there's going to be these differences. Now, commenting on this verse that I just read, Allama Tabatabai in Al-Mizan says, denomination is not a criterion for spiritual success or felicity, sa'adat, in Persian, sa'adat in Arabic. The criteria are submission to God, Islam in a very general sense, and ihsan, which William Chittick translates as doing the beautiful. I'm not going to have enough time to read more verses of the Quran, so I'm going to leave these out. So the function of the end of the world, aside from encouraging people to be good and scaring them away from doing bad things, one of the functions of the end of the world is as a promise of a final resolution to religious disagreement. Some differences, now we have differences, religious differences, and also religious disagreements, and I think this is an important difference. Some differences are differences in rights, and they're caused because of what God required of different prophets and people, according to Islam. Some disagreements are caused by contentiousness. Some disagreements are caused by arrogance. Incorrect beliefs and practices will not prevent divine rewards for sincere submission to God and for doing the beautiful according to Islam. So even if you have the wrong idea according to Islam, you're still going to get rewarded for it if you're trying your best. Islamic sources in the Quran and narrations indicate that the religion brought through the revelation to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is complete, and that the religion with which he was sent is to prevail over others. To prevail over others. Now this is an interesting thing. Most of the conservative theologians say to prevail over others. It means Islam on top, this is going to be proven, this is the best religion, everything else, bye-bye. But I don't read these verses this way, because to me it seems that they're talking, all of them are talking about situations in which there was some struggle, persecution, or even war between the Muslims and other groups. And what the verses, cited verses say, is that Islam is going to prevail against those who fight with them. And in one of these verses, a few verses afterwards, there's a reference to Jesus alayhi salam. It says, "O you who have faith, be Allah's helpers, just as Jesus, son of Mary, said to his disciples, 'Who will be my helpers for Allah's sake?' And the disciples said, 'We will be Allah's helpers.' So a group of the children of Israel believed, and a group disbelieved. Then we strengthened the faithful against their enemies, and they came to prevail over them." So it means that the Christians came to prevail against those who were persecuting them or fighting with them in some way. It doesn't mean that anybody who has any idea other than Islam is going to win in some kind of rational discussion of theology or something like that. On specific points of disagreements, arguments have to be examined to discover who has the best possible or the most plausible position. There can't be any a priori supposition about where the truth lies or about the comparative reliability of the religious teachings of different traditions. The fact that traditional arguments in the major religions, in the major traditions, are found to be less than fully compelling does not imply that they are all equally in possession of religious truth. Where rational argumentation is inconclusive, the possibility of blameless disagreement should be recognized. Although blamelessness does not imply that no error has been made, it does imply that no ranking of merit can be rationally demonstrated. Assuming that some adherents of religions that deny Islamic teachings do not reject those teachings out of ill will and attempt as best they can to believe what is true and to do what's right, Islam teaches that they will be rewarded by God. Perhaps, with regard to other issues, they believe more sincerely and act more righteously than even some believers, and they will be rewarded accordingly. Since the sincerity and intentions of others cannot be known by us from an Islamic point of view, it's best for us to suspend judgment about their faiths and the forms of guidance that God may or may not have provided for them. So this leads me to a criticism of the trilemma. The skeptical theology of religions outlined above does not appear to fit into the typology exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. It's exclusivist insofar as it asserts on the grounds of revealed truth the superiority of Islam with regard to divine authorization. It's inclusivist insofar as it grants that others, religious or non-religious, may achieve divine rewards by faith and good deeds. It's epistemically pluralist insofar as it admits that the adherents of different traditions may be equally unable to give arguments for their positions that will be found convincing by others. But it's also pluralist in another way that I've called non-reductionist, because it allows for the recognition that different standards may be appropriate for different traditions. There's also, I didn't put this here, but there's also a narration that when the 12th Imam comes back at the end of the world, he will judge the Jews by the Torah, and he will judge the Christians by the Gospel, and he will judge the followers of the Psalms by the book of Psalms, 4 days, and that he will also judge the Muslims by the Quran. The tripolar typology has been defended most prominently in recent years by Perry Leuchel Schmidt, who claims that his refinement of the typology makes it logically comprehensive, coercive, and universally, that is, interreligiously applicable. And I want to show that this is mistaken. I'm not going to read all of this stuff because I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time. I'm going to skip to the meat. At least one reason that Schmidt-Leuchel trilemma is not logically comprehensive is that it ignores the possibility of suspended judgment. So basically, Leuchel, show you, here's Leuchel. His answer is pluralism. Here's a chart that shows very nicely how he looks at things. He says, is the message of some religion true, yes or no? If you say no, that means that you're an atheist. If you say yes, then is it only one or is it more than one? If you say just one, you're an exclusivist. If you say more than one, then you're an inclusivist. And everybody has to choose somewhere along this flow chart. This is his position. And he wants to defend pluralism in this way. And the idea that I have of how to answer his questions here for a skeptical theology of religion, again, I'm trying to show how more or less orthodox Islamic position towards this thing would be. So is the message of some religion true? Yes, of course, Islam is true. That's why we're Muslims. Is only one religion true? Well, here, what can we say? The Quran confirms the religions that came before. There's other prophets. So we should suspend judgment about this. This is epoche in ancient Greek. Does one religion excel above all the others in truth? Yes, of course, because we're Muslims. But we know from experience that the arguments that we have in favor of Islam aren't going to convince our atheist and Catholic friends, and not to mention all the others. So the affirmative, this is going to remain with question mark until the day of judgment. And the Quran itself says these differences are going to remain until the day of judgment. So regarding the merits of the other ways, we should suspend definitive judgment. Now, I want to introduce to you Carol Rovain. Carol Rovain is an interesting thinker. She was a student of Donald Davidson, and she wrote a book. The picture of it is here. It's called The Metaphysics and Ethics of Relativism. Carol Rovain is not a theologian. She's a philosopher. She, as far as her ethics and world outview is concerned, she's not religious, but she believes in human rights and liberal values and all of this kind of stuff. She went to India, and when she was in India, she met a woman from a traditional family, and they talked about one another's lives. And she came to the conclusion that she could not really judge this woman or the system of practical thought that she had. She said, we're actually living in different worlds. And this does not mean that our views are equal. Because if we're going to judge equality among the different religious or non-religious worldviews, that means we have to have some kind of standard that we have from like some kind of God's eye point of view. We can measure up each of these systems and say, yep, they're all equal. Rovain says we can't do that because it involves, in order for me to understand seriously what this woman in India, how she thinks about things, I would have to enter into her world in a much deeper way than I'm capable of. So in a spirit of humility, we should just say, maybe we're living in different worlds completely. Now, John Hicks' pluralism is based on a one-world hypothesis. So Hicks appeals to Kant, and he says we have this one noumenal world, and all the different religions are equally good reflections of that one world. Rovain suggests maybe we're not living, maybe we don't have a single noumenal world. Maybe there are many noumenal worlds, and each of our religious traditions is a reflection of one of these noumenal worlds, which may or may not overlap to some extent. So the different religious traditions will reflect different spiritual realities, different worlds, whether understood literally, as did Nelson Goodman. That's a picture of Nelson Goodman up there, or metaphorically. Then there won't be a single scale according to which we can say that they reflect their realities equally well, and our attitude toward other traditions should be, as Rovain puts it, a profound epistemic indifference, or a kind of epoche. Now, she used the term indifference, and this is going to set off buzzers for our Catholic friends, because there's what they call the heresy of indifferentism. The heresy of indifferentism should be kept distinct from what Rovain is talking about. Rovein's epistemic indifference is not to be confused with what has been condemned in the Catholic Church as the heresy of indifferentism. The heretical view is that religious commitment is a matter of indifference. One religion is as good as another, and picking them is something like picking which flavor ice cream you like. Rovein's epistemic indifference prohibits the judgment that one is as good as another, and insists that the different traditions are incommensurable. It's the refusal to pass judgment, either to condemn the other or to pronounce them equal, at least in some cases, not in all cases, that enables Rovein's multimundialism. She uses this expression, multimundialism, means more than one worldism, to resist both the heresy of indifferentism and the trilemma of exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. So Rovin just talks about metaphysics and ethics, but if we expand this to a theology of religions, we can have a Rovinian secular relativism of religions or ethics. Is the message, to go back to Perry Schmidt-Leuckel's trilemma, is the message of some religion or ethic true? Of course, that's why I believe it. So because I'm asserting my own position, of course, thereby committed to the truth of what I'm asserting. And for her, it's Western liberal secularism. Is only one true? Rovin comes to the conclusion, not necessarily. I don't know. I can't get into the head of my friend in India, so I have to refrain from judgment. Does one view excel above all the others in truth regarding the merits of other ways? Rovin says we should suspend definitive judgment. Rovin's view, like that of non-reductive pluralism, violates the presupposition of the tripolar typology by emphasis on the unknown. The standards by which truth is judged for others may be unknown. And to finish, I like to take just the last paragraph of Rovin's book, which I changed a little bit because she was just talking about ethics, so I changed it to fit this question of religious diversity. And here's what I think she would say. I wonder if she would be happy with this at all. I have no idea. But here's stealing her words here. When we encounter religious beliefs and practices, but she says when we encounter other moral beliefs and practices different from our own, we ought not to presume either that they do or that they do not stand in direct logical relations to our own. We ought to approach the task of interpreting others' beliefs and practices with more curiosity about the specific conditions they face than the unimundial stance embodies. I would say than the pluralistic stance embodies, so that we are open to learning that it is appropriate for them to live by thick religious values that we do not share. At the same time, we ought to remain alive to possibilities for engagement that the multimundial stance forsakes, so that if the thick religious truths that others know can be truths for us too, we will not fail to discover them. Yet this is an openness to learning that is quite unlike the openness implied by the one world stance, the unimundial stance, because the openness may reveal that in some cases our spiritual world is in a quite literal and metaphysical sense distinct from that of others. It's an open-minded stance of religious curiosity, then, that acknowledges the potential limits of religious engagement. Thank you for your attention.